Welcome back, Focus Learners. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for another explainer. Today, we're going to set the stage for a forensic breakdown of a truly unprecedented weather anomaly that recently struck the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. We are going to figure out exactly how a seemingly normal, hot summer day completely flipped into a deadly meteorological disaster.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. 130 kilometers per hour. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is a staggering, cyclone-level wind speed. But here's the real catch, you guys. Uttar Pradesh is a landlocked state. It doesn't sit on a coastline where you'd normally expect that kind of cyclonic destruction. And yet, these were the actual wind speeds recorded in districts like Bareilly and Prayagraj, absolutely battering an inland state and leaving just total devastation in their wake. So how does something like this even happen? Well, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover the havoc in UP, the human and structural toll, the actual anatomy of the squall, the climate change connection, and finally, the relief and global response.
All right, starting us off, Section 1, Havoc in Uttar Pradesh. Picture this. It's May 13th. The entire region is just baking under this intense summer heat. And then in a matter of mere hours, the sky completely transforms. That extreme heat transitions violently into massive dust storms, heavy rain and lightning, and this wasn't just some isolated freak storm. It swept across 26 different districts in the state. The sheer shock of it is really what caught so many people off guard. Citizens were literally running for their lives trying to find shelter as giant advertising hoardings are flying through the air and massive trees are being uprooted right in front of them. The suddenness of this shift is absolutely crucial to understanding why it was so deadly.
Moving on to Section 2, the human and structural toll. Now, what's really important to note here is that while 26 districts were affected, the data shows a highly concentrated epicenter. Prayagraj reported 26 casualties, making it the worst-hit district, followed closely by Mirzapur with 19 and Bahodi with 16. So these specific geographic pockets really took the absolute brunt of the winds. And when you look at the statewide totals, the numbers are just heartbreaking. Over 111 human lives were lost, and 72 people were injured. The agricultural and structural impact was just as fierce. We're talking more than 170 animals killed and over 227 houses severely damaged or just completely destroyed. And looking closely at the source reports, it becomes super clear that the wind itself wasn't the only killer. It was what the wind moved. Falling trees, collapsing brick walls, flying metal objects, roofs just caving in. Those were the primary causes of these tragedies.
To really ground these massive numbers in a visceral human reality, I want you to consider the story of Nanhe Mian, a survivor in Bareilly. He was out there trying to hold down a tin shed with a rope right as the winds hit. The sheer, overwhelming force of this storm picked him and the metal shed up, blowing him 50 feet into a nearby maize field. Now, thankfully, he survived, but with fractured limbs. It perfectly illustrates the terrifying, inescapable power of what actually hit the ground that day. So let's figure out how this works. Section 3, Anatomy of the Squall.
Let's ditch the meteorology jargon for a second. What hit Uttar Pradesh wasn't your traditional slow-building storm. It was a squall line. This is a type of storm where wind velocity doesn't just gradually build up, it increases suddenly and rapidly, hitting the ground with explosive, instant speed. Because that wall of wind hits all at once, the destruction is immediate. This atmospheric phenomenon explains exactly why people who were out in the fields or on the streets had almost zero time to find any safe refuge.
And building on that, the engines driving this squall line were cumulonimbus clouds. But you guys, these weren't your average rain clouds. According to the meteorological data from that day, these enormous towering storm clouds reached up to 16 kilometers in height. To put that into perspective, 16 kilometers is roughly the absolute ceiling of the troposphere over India. These clouds were literally punching the roof of our weather-bearing atmosphere, packing just massive, violent thunderstorm activity inside them.
Let's move along and see how this all builds up. It basically took a perfect storm of 3 ingredients colliding to create this kind of atmospheric instability. First, you had a winter-like western disturbance lingering over the northwest. Second, moist easterly winds were being pulled inland all the way from the Bay of Bengal. And third, intense surface heating of over 40 degrees Celsius. Hot air rises rapidly, cools, and then condenses that moisture. It becomes this self-reinforcing engine of violent convection. But here is the critical piece of the puzzle: wind shear.
Wind shear is just the change in wind direction and speed as you go higher up in altitude. So why does that matter? Well, without wind shear, a thunderstorm essentially chokes on its own downdraft and collapses in about an hour. But on this specific day, the contrast between the high-level westerly winds and the low-level easterly winds created extreme shear. It tilted the storm, which allowed it to sustain itself and organize into this deadly, marching line that swept across hundreds of kilometers of the state without losing any energy. Truly wild stuff.
Zooming out to the bigger picture. Section 4. The climate change connection.
The data completely confirms what climate experts have been warning us about. Look at these numbers from the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water. In just 1 year, recorded lightning strikes jumped from 14.8 million to 18.5 million. That is a massive 34% jump. Extreme weather events and violent lightning strikes are rapidly escalating across the entire region. The very baseline of our weather is changing.
To understand exactly why this is happening, we have to look to the Clausius-Clapeyron equation. Now, I know that sounds like a total mouthful, but let's break it down into super simple terms. It's a scientific principle that basically dictates that for every 1 degree Celsius our planet warms, the air can hold roughly 7% more water vapor. It is literally that simple. Hotter temperatures mean the atmosphere carries a much heavier load of moisture. So when a trigger like a western disturbance sets that moisture rising, the resulting storms are exponentially more energetic. They drop heavier rain and produce much more violent winds than they ever would in a cooler climate.
And finally, Section 5, Relief and Global Response. In the immediate aftermath, the state administration sprang into action. Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath directed that an immediate financial compensation of 4 lakh rupees be provided to the families of the deceased. Furthermore, strict directives were given to district magistrates to assess all agricultural and structural losses. The goal was to ensure that these relief funds reached the affected families within a strict 24-hour window under the State Disaster Response Fund norms.
You know, the scale of this tragedy was so immense that it prompted an immediate outpouring of global support. Russian President Vladimir Putin sent official correspondence expressing his deepest condolences for the massive destruction. The UAE's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued an official statement of solidarity with India, and Singapore's High Commissioner publicly expressed profound grief over the heavy loss of life, specifically noting the absolute devastation in Bareilly. It really highlights how this localized inland storm resonated across the globe.
We've seen the human cost, we've broken down the atmospheric science, and we've looked at the global response. But I want to leave you with this core takeaway. With highly energized, extreme weather undeniably becoming our new normal, is our infrastructure truly ready for the next squall? Because the science tells us it's no longer a matter of if the next 130-kilometer-per-hour wind hits, but when. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the big questions, and I will see you in the next one.